morning and welcome to Begin in the Word. Our text today comes from Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22 through 25. The Bible says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. The righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the belly of the wicked suffers want." In today's study, we are working through Book 2 within the larger book of Proverbs. This book includes chapter 10 through chapter 24. It contains proverbs that Solomon collected during his reign. This outline shows where we are working in the text. The subject of today's proverb is provision for the family. Today's text is segregated from the verses around it by including a set of parallel strophes. As shown on your screen, the parallel strophes illustrate the similarities and differences between providing for your family in both their physical and moral needs. By laying these concepts in parallel, Solomon is demonstrating a life well lived strikes a balance between these two responsibilities, indeed links them as if they were one and the same duty. In the first phrase, Solomon says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous." In the context, being a good man speaks to his work ethic, thriftiness, and his ability to accumulate resources instead of consuming them. The sinner is defined by the fact that his wealth is laid up in careless ways so that he loses ownership of it. The sinner is not cautious. He is not thrifty. He has laid up his wealth for the purposes of consumption, not for the purpose of building a legacy of resources for his descendants. Like the rich young ruler in our Lord's parable, he has stored his crops in barns so that he can take his ease, stop working, and live off the excess. There is no thought for his children and grandchildren. Just as the Lord told the rich young ruler, so it is for the sinner in Solomon's proverb. Who will these things belong to? So ask yourself, who will your things belong to? Are you consuming your wealth, or are you investing it so that there is a dividend to your descendants? This distinction has a lot to do with how you define invest and consume. First, think of every expense of your resources as either a consumption or an investment. Now, sometimes what we might think of as consumption is actually an investment in yourself. Imagine the farmer in Aesop's famous fable not feeding the goose that lays the golden egg, saying he doesn't want to spend his wealth on consumption. Really? Feeding the goose is not consumption. It is an investment in the future of a golden egg. Buying a car is, or should be, an investment in the future. You bought it so you can drive to work, so you can take the kids to school, so you can drive to church. It becomes a tool that you use toward productive purposes of all kinds. Buying a house, paying for food, even that occasional trip out of town, all should be thought of as investments in the future. When those same purchases become consumption, you are no longer the good man in this proverb. You have joined the ranks of the sinner that is laying up wealth for others. Every penny you earn and every penny you spend should be invested in something. Even your consumptions should be so arranged as to be investments. This mindset is how you will leave an inheritance to your children's children, which is a godly thing to do. Solomon says the fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. This phrase is a tricky piece of text. First, by way of definition, in this case, fallow ground means ground that has been cultivated for the first time. The poor man does not have much ground, and it may not be the best ground. But with work and patience, even a small patch of ground that has never produced food can produce such an abundance. Who among us has planted a few vegetables in a flower pot just to later be inundated with more cucumbers than a family can possibly eat? It is sad but true that one cruel act of one selfish and powerful entity, man, government, corporation, criminal mob, take your pick. That one cruel act can with one fell swoop take everything this poor man owns. It is an injustice. This underscores the urgency for the careful man to exercise the greatest of discretion regarding his property. Remember the lesson of Hezekiah. He showed his holdings to the Babylonian officials, and a few years later they were ransacking it all and taking it for themselves. Solomon says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Heretofore, Solomon has advised us regarding the importance of passing on material well-being to your children's children. Now, in parallel phrase, he will advise us regarding the importance of passing on moral well-being to your heritage. As already noted, this indicates that for Solomon, the two concepts are inextricably connected. The same ethic that drives one behavior, material well-being, will also drive the other, moral well-being. That ethic being a selfless love for your family. Let's first observe an axiomatic truth embedded in Solomon's teaching. This world and the humans occupying it are broken. Children, and for Solomon, particularly boys, will begin to take on broken behavior over time. If not corrected, the bad behaviors will become moral depravity. A parent, and for Solomon, particularly the father, that loves their child does not want this outcome. Their love instead wants the child to mature into an adult that is disciplined and guided by strong moral character. Their love therefore drives them to apply discipline in correcting the child. For Solomon, to not do so is tantamount to hating the child. Who among the listeners wants their son to follow the path illustrated on your screen? Nobody. So this verse does not lack controversy. Up to the time that Dr. Benjamin Spock published his book, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care, in 1946, it was universally accepted that child rearing must include structured discipline that included various forms of corporal punishment born of love. A review of any ancient culture will reveal the same. I have a good friend that grew up in Sri Lanka, where he and his friend were publicly caned for having committed robbery, an age-old law in Sri Lanka. He was 16 at the time, and by Sri Lankan law, the punishment required the approval of his father. His father approved, and my friend endured the caning. After the caning, his eyes filled with tears of both pain and regret, he publicly hugged his father's neck and apologized to him for shaming the family. I was with him in the United States many years later when he received word of his father's passing. He wept again for the love of his father. I do not offer this story in support of public canings. That is a debate for another place and time. I offer it as evidence of the universally accepted maxim that effective corporal punishment can and must be an extension of love and caring for the recipient. This is exactly what Solomon said. Listen carefully to his words. He who loves him is diligent to discipline him. The rod of discipline is born of love. How many of us have seen a parent strike out in anger toward their child with harsh words? Such an act is nothing less than child abuse and is patently wrong. It is wrong because it is born of anger, not love. On the other hand, how many among the number of disciplined people remember fondly those times their parents punished them, with there being no doubt that each punishing blow came from the place of love, a concern for the child's moral well-being? Parent, if you are angry, go in the other room until you calm down. Never, never punish your child when you are angry or upset. Only punish your child when your love for them, your concern for their moral well-being is the driving motive. By the way, Dr. Spock's two sons told the New York Times that their dad was a rather stern and disciplined father. They turned out to be fine men, Michael, a museum director, and John, the owner of a construction company. And Solomon says, the righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the belly of the wicked suffers want. Matthew Henry's commentary on this verse is brilliantly spoken. He says regarding the righteous, "It is the happiness of the righteous that they shall have enough, and that they know when they have enough. They desire not to be serfs, but being moderate in their desires, they are soon satisfied. Nature is content with a little, and grace with less. Enough is as good as a feast. Those that feed on the bread of life, that feast on the promises, meet with abundant satisfaction of soul, and there eat and are filled." Now he says regarding the wicked, "It is the misery of the wicked that, through the insatiableness of their own desires, they are always needy. Not only their souls shall not be satisfied with the world and the flesh, but even their belly shall want. Their sensual appetite is always craving. In hell they shall be denied a drop of water." Friend, focus on leaving a good heritage and thus creating a family legacy of well-being, a heritage of material well-being, and a heritage of moral well-being. Thanks for joining us today on Begin in the Word. I hope as you have begun today in the Word of God, you will live out today in the Word of God.